Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post with me, Ghadi Francis. This is our weekly show where we bring you all the latest updates from the world's most volatile region. And this week we're coming to you from Lebanon. Lebanon is facing a blast of Gulf Arab anger. This comes after a prominent broadcaster turned minister leveled blunt criticism at Saudi Arabia, a row that has further strained Beirut's ties with once generous benefactors. For Riyadh, it is a sign that its sway in Lebanon has waned. But for citizens of Lebanon, they are caught in a conflict that has defined West Asia for decades. We bring you the story. A televised remark by Lebanon's information minister has sparked a diplomatic row in the country. But what were these comments about? The war in Yemen. This is the Crown Prince's personal battle, a war he pulled his country into. So when Qardahi called this war futile, all hell broke loose in the region. Anger over Qardahi's comments led to further escalation. Gulf countries have isolated Lebanon. They have threatened to split its new government, withdrawing envoys and banning imports. It is important to note that Lebanon-Saudi relations have not been good since 2016. This was when President Michel Aoun was elected. The reason was his alliance with Hezbollah. Riyadh found it hard to stomach the influence of Hezbollah, especially in a country in which the kingdom has invested heavily. Saudi Arabia's most drastic move came in 2017. It forced then Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri to resign. The reason? Hezbollah's domination. But the incident backfired. Hariri returned home and revoked his resignation. But what he lost was Saudi backing. Since then, relations have been chilly, so the comments were a timely spark for MBS. This even though these comments were made before Qardahi became a minister in the government. The Saudis know what they don't want. That is, growing Iranian influence in Lebanon. But they don't know what to do about it. Saudi Arabia's Gulf allies are uniting, hitting Lebanon with punitive measures. But many are asking what the end game is.
There is not a crisis between us and Lebanon. There is a crisis in Lebanon because of the domination of Iran's agents on the scene. This is what concerns us, and this is what makes dealing with Lebanon futile for the kingdom and the Gulf countries. What is important is for the Lebanese leaders to wake up and to search for a way to restore Lebanon's position in the Arab world. That is possible, and they can.
What Saudi Arabia could in fact do is to destabilize the new government, the product of months of negotiations. MBS was even keener to take a hard line, trying to make up for his absence on the global stage. This will allow Riyadh to reassert itself in West Asia. But taking down the government will not help Riyadh. It could even further alienate its Western allies. This is a terrible situation for Lebanon. It is already reeling from a financial crisis, and this diplomatic crisis could cost it deeply. So what Beirut wants is a dialogue with Riyadh.
There has been no dialogue with Saudi Arabia, even before the problem with Minister Qardahi. The Saudi ambassador here never communicated with us. It's a new ministry, and usually all ambassadors in Lebanon congratulate the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. This is protocol. But we didn't hear from the Saudi ambassador. He was here and was communicating with a lot of Lebanese politicians, but he wasn't communicating with us.
Saudi Arabia and its fellow Gulf Arab monarchies once spent billions of dollars in aid in Lebanon. They still provide jobs and a haven for much of Lebanon's huge diaspora. So a growing Hezbollah influence did not sit too well with them. Fear is gripping Lebanese expats in the Gulf. Despite official assurances, they will not be sent home. Saudi Arabia's embargo on imports is another severe blow. The country could face lost revenue to the tune of $300 million a year. Lebanon is not an exporting country, but 10% of what it does export goes to Saudi Arabia. So, by striking at Lebanon's wallet, it is hitting where it hurts. The Saudi-Iran rivalry is a fight over influence. The whole of West Asia is their battlefield. But ironically, this comes at a time when the two foes are holding talks. Sources even suggest Lebanon was not even on the table. Currently, Riyadh has shown how it can really disturb Lebanon. So one might expect things to cool down soon. Many Lebanese fear they will be the ones paying the price for a historic rivalry that has torn West Asia apart for years. West Asia Bureau, WION. World is one. We have a lot more lined up for this edition of the West Asia Post. But first, as usual, let's take a look at what else is making the headlines across West Asia.
The US has sanctioned Israeli firm NSO Group over spyware. Biden's administration blacklists 2 Israeli companies for producing spyware that enables transnational repression. Large sinkholes at the shores of the Red Sea are threatening local communities and tourists at the lowest point of land on Earth. The phenomenon has increased over the past years, making the area unsafe for visitors and locals alike. Biden and Erdogan met on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Rome, discussing the issues of F-16 fighter jet sales and human rights. The two leaders have agreed to form a joint mechanism to strengthen ties. Turkish authorities have detained 17 people for putting a hood over the head of a visiting civilian US Navy serviceman. This was in protest against United States policy in West Asia. Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah have rejected an unjust deal with Israeli settlers. The deal would have seen them accept the temporary ownership of their homes by settlers. Archaeologists excavated the first and what they believe is the oldest industrial wine press, dating back more than 2,700 years. The discovery includes 14 installations carved into mountain rocks.
Iran and the United States have taken their conflict to the high seas. Revolutionary guards say that they thwarted an attempt by the US to steal Iranian oil in the Sea of Oman. The United States have now denied the Iranian account of attempted oil tanker capture. But this development comes amid faltering efforts to revive Iran's nuclear deal with world powers that would see lifting of US sanctions on Iran's oil exports. We tell you more.
It looks like a scene straight out of a Hollywood movie. A fleeing ship in the middle of the sea, helicopters hovering over it, with guards trying to take control. But this isn't a billion-dollar budget movie. It is happening here in the Sea of Oman, as the conflict between the US and Iran moved to the high seas of West Asia. There are contrasting accounts about what really happened in the middle of the sea. Iran says US was trying to seize a tanker carrying its oil, so it did what it had to do: defend its oil. Iranian Revolutionary Guards sprang into action. With air support, they took over the tanker.
They had come to steal our oil, and based on an exact scenario, we determined that if this tanker was to be taken, the US would interfere. This was predicted. Our team had gauged all possibilities.
They were quick to brag about it also. It was their arch-rival they were talking about, and Iran left no stones unturned to tell the world that they were victorious. US, on the other hand, were quick to rubbish the claims. American officials said that in reality, Iranian forces had seized a Vietnamese-flagged oil tanker and US naval forces were just monitoring the situation. Ironically, IRGC's claims come on the eve of the anniversary of the 1979 US Embassy hostage crisis. On November 4th, 1979, a group of Iranian students took over the US Embassy, taking 52 US diplomats and citizens hostage. They were held for 444 days in the capital. It also comes at a time when nuclear talks are set to resume. Talks to revive the 2015 deal will begin on November the 29th. Negotiations have been on hold since the election of hardline Raisi. The 6 rounds of talks held so far have been indirect. While US welcomes the return of talks, it remains wary of Iranian actions in the region.
We've made clear that Iran's continued nuclear escalations are unconstructive, that they are inconsistent with the stated goal that Iran has put forward of seeking to return to mutual compliance with the JCPOA. We've also been very clear that Iran's nuclear provocations and escalations won't provide Iran with any additional negotiating leverage when talks resume.
The US-Iran conflict is not new, but day by day, the two foes grow more hostile. A new crisis is looming between America and Iran. While talks to restore a nuclear deal are going badly, the alternatives are far from grim. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
Not just the high seas. US is sending multiple warnings to Iran. US Air Force flew a B-1B bomber over essential maritime choke points across West Asia. The bomber was flanked by jets from Egypt, Israel, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia, a sign of assurance for the US allies in the region and a warning for Iran. We bring you the story.
This is the B-1B Lancer bomber, an icon of the Cold War. It was originally designed to be a strategic nuclear bomber, an ability to fly at low altitude to avoid early warning radars. But since then, this bomber has adapted. It is used extensively both in air support and bombing runs. West Asia got a glimpse of this beast this week. The US Air Force flew the B-1B over the region. A 5-hour non-stop patrol mission. It covered all key maritime choke points, the Strait of Hormuz, the Red Sea, its narrow Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and Egypt's Suez Canal. But the bomber wasn't flying alone. It was being flanked by fighter jets from Bahrain, Egypt, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. The message was simple. A warning to arch-rival Iran, and a show of strength to its allies in the Gulf. The B-1 is the backbone of America's bomber force. The CENTCOM says by deploying it, it wanted to deliver a message of reassurance. But for many, it was almost like a veiled threat. This is the 5th CENTCOM mission in West Asia this year. Bombers have suddenly made a comeback here. First, there were the B-52s, and now the B-1B Lancer bomber. This sudden dispatch is most definitely a show of strength, one that may not go down well with Iran. It also comes at a time when nuclear talks are set to resume, but the US remains skeptical about it. Washington says they are committed to diplomacy, but they leave the decision up to the negotiators. Ironically, their deployment comes at a time when the US appears to be withdrawing forces from here. This shake-up and the deployment now raises questions about the continuing role of the United States in West Asia. While the deployment looks like a largely symbolic gesture, for now, the message remains loud and clear. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
The COP26 summit is underway in Glasgow. Climate change jargon is making the headlines. A lot of technical words are being thrown around. Carbon neutral, sustainable development, greenwashing. But the most coveted term of them all is net zero. But the big question is, would West Asian nations afford to go net zero? We tell you more.
Countries want to go net zero. The race to attain net zero has become a rallying point. So what exactly is net zero? Simply put, it means achieving a balance. The amount of greenhouse gases we put in the environment must be equal to the amount we take out. Basically, what we add should be no more than what we take away. This can be done through a lot of processes. The net zero is not part of the Paris Agreement, but it is being touted as the silver bullet aimed at climate change. This is where the problem begins. The idea of net zero is essentially aspirational. The call for action discounts what it means for the richer and poorer nations. A disparity that is growing wider, even in Glasgow. But for Gulf nations, the switch is a difficult one. They are pushing for a net zero future, but the shift can't be an immediate one. They need to keep the oil flowing to fund the transition. These nations are exposed to global warming. They are investing billions into solar and wind power, all in an effort to become world leaders in clean energy. But there remains need to pump more oil. The Gulf nations need to keep their economies running, and oil remains the biggest source of income.
We're aiming to do the 2060. However, with the same NDC scenarios, this can be achieved even before, subject to the conditionality as I described on how our diversity program will evolve, how much oil and gas will be exported, and liquid gases I mean, and how much we will be internalizing it as a result of what may happen to the world oil markets and what have you.
King Salman has pledged to develop clean energy, but he says the kingdom will continue its role in achieving security and stability in energy markets. Joining nations that pledged to cut emissions was the UAE. While the Gulf nation is ready to make a transition, it says it can't just switch off the tap on oil. For Gulf states planning to cut emissions, the task is an uphill one. Saudi Arabia is the world's fourth largest oil consumer. It relies on oil and gas to fuel its power stations, and even produce electricity in the kingdom. Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE and Bahrain are also the top 4 carbon emitters on a per capita basis. The focus is on the Saudi Crown Prince's dream city, a futuristic zero-carbon community called NEOM. The first phase of the project is a linear smart city, spanning 170 kilometers of desert and mountains. A blueprint for how people and the planet can coexist in harmony. The line will compromise carbon-positive urban developments, which will be powered by 100% clean energy. But plans are one thing, executing them is a different task altogether. Saudi Arabia has set a net zero target by 2060, but its emissions right now are skyrocketing. So while the goal of net zero looks like a coveted one, the time for climate action is now, not 30 years later. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Women across West Asia are shattering the glass ceilings in the world of sports. They are breaking the mold in the world of male-dominated sports, from shooting to football. Women are turning to sports, dreaming of a better future in the region. We tell you more.
Mona Al-Quraish loves guns. She's liked them ever since she was a young girl. Her father used to take her on hunting trips in Saudi Arabia. He also taught her how to shoot. 5 years ago, Mona turned this passion into a profession. She took coaching classes to become a licensed firearms trainer. The 36-year-old now teaches shooting in Riyadh, with more and more women joining her classes.
I'm proud to be one of the first Saudi women, or one of the elites, chosen to join the practical course for referees and coaches from IPSC organization under the supervision of Saudi Shooting Federation. I'm so happy to practice my passion and hobby as a coach and a range safety officer at Top Gun at the moment, and hopefully to share my experience with Saudi women to encourage them to enter this hard field, which was a male-dominated field.
Attitudes towards women are slowly evolving here. Women are making steady gains in the workforce. They are taking up jobs in a range of professions. But this is not without its own problems, especially with a male-dominated environment. But as more and more girls learn how to handle guns, Mona hopes for attitudes to change in the kingdom. In Iraq's Mosul, girls are fighting the same battle. They are shattering stereotypes in the war-torn nation. Football is helping them dream of a better future.
It has been 6 months since I enrolled in the academy to develop my football skills, especially that only a few girls in the region or in the country play this sport. I wish we had stadiums to support so that I can represent my country, and specifically Bartella.
The coach is 22-year-old Youssef Chaba. Spurred on by her, the girls kick the ball around a field. About 50 girls are enrolled at the academy. They attend 2-hour training sessions twice a week. Their dream is to play for the country, trying to restore a semblance of normality to Bartella. During its 3-year rule over nearly a third of Iraq, the Islamic State tortured hundreds of women, using beatings and executions as punishments. Now football is a breath of fresh air for the women here. Women across West Asia are taking to sports as their struggle for freedom continues every day. For both Mona and Chaba, it was all about taking the first step. The first attempt at shattering the glass ceiling. West Asia Bureau, WION World is one.
West Asia is not without its share of culture, beauty and oddities. This is why in our next segment called Curiosities, we bring you some heartwarming stories from the region.
تلك الوفافة التي نحتت آمال
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you more stories from the world's most volatile region. Until then, stay safe. I am Ghadi Francis, and you're watching WION. World is One.